Welcome to this explainer. Today we're looking at a period that's, well, it's nothing less than a fundamental rewiring of human thought. Literally the foundation of the modern age. If you've ever wondered how humanity finally shifted gears to create the world of science, art, and individual freedom that we all recognize today, well, let's trace that spark.
So how exactly did Europe wake up from the Dark Ages to build the modern world? I mean, it definitely didn't happen overnight, and it for sure didn't happen by accident. Today, we're tracing this incredibly fascinating narrative arc. We're going to see how a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of curiosity turned into a massive intellectual flame that literally swept across an entire continent.
Section 1. The Rebirth of Europe. The word Renaissance literally means rebirth, a total revival of learning, art, science, and classical knowledge. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this stark contrast. On one side, we've got the medieval mindset. We're talking rigid feudal systems, highly limited education, and unquestioned dogma. Basically, you didn't ask why, you just did what you were told. But then, on the other side, the Renaissance shatters that entirely. Suddenly, we're seeing individualism, a secular outlook, and this profound spirit of inquiry. Seriously, every modern right you have to think for yourself and value your own achievements, that was hard-won right here during this pivotal shift.
To really understand the how, let's just look at this timeline. It all sparks in Italy during the 14th century, but look right there at the middle of the 15th century, it's a rapid-fire chain reaction. 1450, bam, the printing press is invented. Just 3 years later, the fall of Constantinople. These events acted as a massive accelerator pedal, and throughout the 15th and 16th centuries, this movement just spills right out of Italy and spreads across Europe like wildfire.
Section 2. Sparks of the Awakening. Let's look at the actual catalyst of this change.
Honestly, you can kind of think of this era as the ultimate startup story. First off, the old monopoly, feudalism, starts to decline. Second, we get our 15th century angel investors. Italian trade cities like Florence, Venice, and Genoa are growing incredibly rich, and wealthy merchant families, think the Medicis, they use these vast fortunes to fund innovators. Third is basically an intellectual heist. When Constantinople falls in 1453, Greek scholars flee to Italy, carrying all these lost ancient manuscripts. And finally, the ultimate tech breakthrough, Gutenberg's printing press. Suddenly, you have a machine making books cheap and accessible, knowledge literally goes viral. It was absolutely the 15th century internet.
So, out of this crazy collision of wealth, ancient knowledge, and new tech emerges the absolute philosophical engine of the whole era. Humanism. Instead of just, enduring this life as prep for the afterlife, humanism argued something totally different. It said that human values, individual achievement, and our worldly life right now are inherently valuable. It was a complete, radical rebranding of what it actually meant to be human.
And of course, every movement needs its trailblazers, right? Enter Francesco Petrarch, widely known as the father of humanism, and his peer Giovanni Boccaccio. These guys pioneered this whole movement. I mean, they were literally out there hunting down forgotten, dust-covered classical scrolls in old dark monasteries. And they weren't just reading history for fun. They were using it to build an entirely new framework for how humans should think, learn, and live.
Which brings us to Section 3. Humanism and the Arts. Let's see how this exploded into the art world.
Because here's the thing. This new philosophical focus on the individual definitely didn't stay locked away in dusty books. It exploded visually. Since humanism was all about celebrating the physical world, artists just completely ditched those flat, rigid, two-dimensional styles of the Middle Ages. Instead, they brought in stunning realism, mathematically precise perspective to create actual 3D illusions, and these obsessive, scientifically minded nature studies. For the first time in a long time, they started painting the world exactly as it actually looked.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we can cleanly map out these big names and their monumental achievements. You've got Leonardo da Vinci, the quintessential Renaissance man, who, by the way, literally dissected human bodies just to understand the anatomy beneath his masterpieces like the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. Then there's Michelangelo, an absolute master of realism and perspective, and Raphael, the celebrated painter of classical beauty. Funded by all that merchant wealth we talked about, these innovators essentially made philosophy visible.
Section 4. Science and Global Discovery. Let's see how this spirit of inquiry completely shattered old beliefs.
Now, look at these scientific giants. The shift here is mind-blowing. Nicholas Copernicus actually dared to question the centuries-old absolute belief that the Earth was the center of the universe.
Then Galileo pushed the boundaries even further by actually using a telescope for scientific observation to prove it, which, let me tell you, was a deeply dangerous move at the time. And Johannes Kepler used rigorous experimentation and math to map planetary motion. They completely abandoned dogma in favor of actual, provable observation, a real game changer. And while those scientists were intellectually exploring the heavens, navigators were physically exploring the Earth. Explorers from the Age of Discovery, names you definitely know like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan, they pushed right out into the unknown. The map of the world was literally being redrawn in real time, and the effects? Massive. We're talking new sea routes, a huge expansion of global trade, and the immense, complex spread of European influence across the globe.
But this spirit of inquiry didn't stop at science and geography. It even turned its lens on the era's absolute most powerful institution, the Church. The Protestant Reformation, led by figures like Martin Luther, actively criticized religious corruption and pushed for independent thinking. Regardless of anyone's personal theology, historically speaking, this was another massive catalyst. It established that even the highest, most untouchable authorities could, and perhaps should, be questioned by the everyday individual.
Section 5. The Modern World's Foundation. Let's bring this all back home.
So the crucial point is this. The Renaissance permanently ended that medieval mindset. It seeded the scientific method that builds literally all our technology today. It completely developed new realms of literature and art, and it promoted education and the absolute necessity of freedom of thought. Everything we just covered here, it is the bedrock foundation of modern Western civilization. Period. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to end on. The Renaissance really was this perfect storm, right? Ancient knowledge, new tech like the printing press, sudden wealth, and this super brave willingness to question everything. So, looking at our world today with our own rapid technological shifts and hyperconnectivity, what will it take to spark our next great awakening? Think about that for a second. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and as always, keep learning.